They arrive in New York. About 24 hours later, they board a cargo ship and go off to work. But then after that, they're never mentioned again. Where did they go? How is it possible that, that they just suddenly disappear? So the 6 survivors leave New York on SS Aneta almost immediately after arriving on Carpathia. And it's actually Aneta that points the way for the Bristol archives. And they had a lot of the shipping records from that time.
Here we go. So this is the box that has the crew lists for the SS Aneta. The first one we have here, SS Aneta, Port of Registry, Bristol. Then there's some details relating to its destination, etc. This is the actual list of the crew themselves. At the bottom of this page, you'll start to find the 5 sailors that you're looking for.
Yeah, all right. So yeah, Alam, Fang Lang, Li Bing, Chang Chip, Chung Fu, and then...
Yeah, should be one more over the page.
And then Ling here, yeah. Wow, yeah, so Alam signs his name, Li Bing, so Chang Chip signs his name, but Chung Fu is probably illiterate because he makes a mark.
Yeah.
That's too bad. The Chinese name would be helpful for us. So the nice thing is our 6 survivors get on board Aneta and sail away, and then we get to see what they were up to for the next couple of years. They were essentially on what we would call fruit boats or banana boats. So they're sailing between various ports along the American East Coast down to ports in the Caribbean. But these are guys who are working in the engine room. It's super hot, super noisy. They're shoveling coal all day. But this is something we see throughout, is Chinese laborers taking jobs that other people are not willing to do. And then, so Chang Chip is...
Left in hospital.
Left in hospital?
Yeah.
Wow.
Shortly after that, they certified that the undermentioned has been discharged.
So he goes to hospital, he comes back to the ship, and then he's discharged?
Yes.
Wow.
The last trace we have of Chung Chip is being ill, being discharged from Aneta somewhere in the US. We'd kind of lost trace of him, thought perhaps he died there. But we actually found a Chung Chip cropping up in the UK who passes away in 1914 of pneumonia several months after he'd been reported as discharged in the US. And his occupation is listed also as a seaman.
When we found the record that Chung Chip had died in London in 1914, we had an address in Limehouse. The immediate thing for me was, well, let's have a look at the map. Where is this? And that's how we end up finding him at East London Cemetery.
The cemetery was not able to disclose the exact location of the grave. The tombstone has been removed, but they said that there was a memorial dedicated to all Chinese buried in this country, and Chung Chip is supposedly buried very near there. The fact that for Chung Chip you can go to a specific place in London, it's quite moving, and it reminds you that there are real people behind all of this research.
Why are 8 Chinese men on board Titanic sailing to North America? Because there's a coal strike on in the UK at the time. Their employer, the Donald Line, looks at them and says, well, are we gonna let these guys sit around, until the strike is resolved? No, we need them on our North American routes. Okay, we'll buy them a ticket and we'll send them across. They just happened to end up on the Titanic. Titanic's only ship sailing. But then 2 years later, when their contracts on Aneta start to expire, there's another opportunity for them, and that is suddenly you have World War I kicking off in Europe.
In 1914, war breaks out in Europe, and all of the native British seamen who had been working on merchant ships were drafted to join the Navy. So there was suddenly a big demand for laborers and seamen to work on these merchant ships, and a lot of them were in fact Chinese sailors. Between the beginning and the end of the war, the number of Chinese sailors working on British ships went from about 5,000 to 15,000. It's very likely some of our survivors worked on these merchant ships around UK and Europe. We found these CR10 cards, which are essentially an identity and service certificate, which included a passport picture of a sailor. So we found dozens of cards of these Chinese sailors that could potentially be our survivors. So, English tea, you said?
Sure.
Let's do it.
I want to bring you up to date on some of the research that we've been doing, things that we believe about our guys, especially the survivors that we think ended up in the UK. With Alam, he's discharged from Manetta on July 29th, 1912. About 9 months later, we do have this Lam Choi appear, and he lists his previous ship as Manetta. Now, there are no other lambs that appear as having been on Anetta, which would also help us explain why we think that Alam becomes Lam Choi.
The difficulty in a place like the UK, which has a much smaller overseas Chinese population with less organized associations, is that those records, they're not always easily accessible.
Hi.
Good morning.
I asked for those crew lists to see if the signature matches. Then we have
Right.
potentially like a really nice storyline for those guys.
Right. Would those give us a better lead on an Alam? Or I know you had one
Yes.
connected to a CR10.
So one of the alams is Lam Choi. His age matches. The picture is like really evocative. He looks like somebody who's been through a lot.
Where does he go after Anetta?
He served on the Bendu, and his next ship then is Achilles, which heads to Singapore, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. And that is where he and maybe 20, 30 other Chinese guys, they disappear there. There's no record of them coming back on Achilles. Oddly enough, on Achilles, and I had never seen this before, on the ship's logs, there is a separate list and log sheet attached onto the ship's logs that are just the Chinese guys. And we're not to see any of these guys again.
I started trying to dig up what had happened in the years after the First World War, and there are a lot of factors, I guess, that led to a hardening of hostilities towards foreigners in general in the UK. There was a downturn in world trade, so there's less business. So suddenly you have hundreds of Chinese sailors that are unemployed and milling about Liverpool and London. At the National Archives at Kew, I stumbled across a big pile of documents that had been exchanged between the Home Office, but also the police departments of Liverpool and London. They speak about issues such as, how do we deal with all of these Chinese seamen? They all have very confusing names. We don't know how to keep track of them. Right at the bottom of this pile were pages and pages of discussions relating to repatriating Chinese seamen immediately after the war.
We were looking at old newspapers and big exodus of seamen from the East End. London's Chinatown, a surprise change. The end of Chinatown. We have journalists going into London and Liverpool Chinatown saying, these are ghost towns. Based on the shipping records that I've been looking at, there's definitely a relationship between these Chinatowns emptying out, and sometimes it even says Chinatown's emptying out of Chinese sailors.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we see them disappear in Asia on British ships.
The repatriations of Chinese sailors back to Asia helped to explain Alam's sudden departure and disappearance. But then we discovered a similar story for another of our survivors, Ling He.
我现在找到的是，可能是他的一张 CR10， 他的名字跟他那上面不太一样，他是 Young P， 但是比较好的一点是，他有张他的照片，然后在照片上可以看出来他左脸颊上面这边有一道疤，因为你看过阿内塔的那个记录，你就知道他有一个 description， 就是他有一个 large scar on left cheek， 然后也是蛮巧的，正好这张照片上面你是可以看出来的。然后我们是找到他的签名，因为他是一个言，他的那个言字写的不太一样，所以应该这可以确定是他的。然后林希的最后一艘船是 City of Keelung，然后我们最后查到是他1920年10月份的时候，在印度的一个城市，他就自己下船了，然后没有再回来。对，印度
是吧？
一个叫 Calcutta 的一个城市。
我知道为什么他在印度下船了吗？
因为当时 City of Keelung 它在亚洲唯一停靠的就是那个Calcutta那个城市，所以虽然也不是香港啊那种比较常见的地方，但是已经是离中国最近的了。想他会不会可能是想回去啊之类的。
是吗？
因为当时他们也不能再回美国，然后也不能再回英国。
We may never know for sure if Alam and Ling He were forcibly repatriated, but certainly there was a generation after World War II when Chinese sailors were forcibly repatriated.
My father, who's from Shanghai, and as I've later discovered, it disappeared before or possibly just immediately after I was born. And it's only since Charles and I started doing all the research that we pieced together the story that they disappeared. A lot of our mothers did go to their grave believing they'd been deserted.
Yeah, you're not going to find out what happened to your father.
No, we're not. That's the sad side of it. We're not going to find that out. We don't have the list of those that were forced to leave.
Wow.
That's the tragedy.
Wow.
A lot of the police stations that had records were all bombed.
Right.
So there's nothing there. And they didn't have a powerful voice. Where did they go? What happened to them? Why?
The government decided, well, actually, we don't want you here anymore. And with really no warning, rounded these people up and threw them out of the country. Took them away from their families, from their wives and their children, from their communities, and sent them back to a country that they hadn't lived in maybe for 10, 15, 20 years. We in the UK have such a complicated, to say the least, history with so many other parts of the world. And there's a lot to be answered for and a lot of history to be reckoned with.
Discoveries?
Yeah, oh, well, yeah, we found a few things.
Building on the back side of one of these older, well, these are all newer, but there used to be older buildings. There used to be another house in the back of these houses. My father used to live upstairs on that top window in the corner.
Every year, we used to go down to Chicago. They had this thing called the Fong Family Reunion, and they would have it at this big restaurant somewhere in Chinatown. And he was well known with this Fong Association. And he'd go around shaking hands and guide me by my hand. This is my son, this is my son. And that was, that was his pride, I guess. And he always wore suits. He never wore casual clothes, as far as I can remember. Everything was dress suit pants and shirts and ties. And my entire memory, my father has always been in a dress suit. I think he was trying to elevate himself as a businessman, as a merchant of some sort. And later on in life, he lived more of a humble life, and he just worked as a waiter and so forth. It's not in here. No. Yep, right there.
Right there?
He's right there.
Oh, yeah, this is.
Oh my God, now I know who he is. Oh my God, I do know him.
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Oh my God, I know who he is now.
Okay, that one.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, hi, gay ducker. I know who he is now. Good thing you mentioned the old lady picture. That's why you get a picture. I don't know you, so can't do me any good.
Okay.
Here.
Yeah.
There's a picture of him I had back then.
Okay. See?
On the website.
Okay, yeah. That's him.
That's him. He completed that picture. That's why he showed me your picture.
Hey, you want to keep that picture, honey?
2 houses down, there was a house for rent, and my father went there to ring the doorbell to ask about renting this property. I was standing behind him. I believe I was like about 4 at the time, and the gentleman said he would never rent to a yellow dog like you. And the first thing I remember was my father just physically punched him right in the face. He just went right down to his knees. And my father went through, about 70 years old. He was a man that did not back down about anything, so.
The story of Tom's father continued to intrigue us. And the key mystery was, if Tom's father was Fong Lung, the Chinese passenger rescued from the water, then why the name change and when the name changed? When does he go from being Fong Lung to Feng Wing Sun?
The exclusion law only affected the laborers, and it did not affect the merchants or the scholars. The merchants were able to travel freely back and forth between China and the United States. So every time they returned to China, they claimed that they had given birth to a son. Then they take that paper and they sell it to someone. Then he would be allowed to come into the country legally.
paper 上这个，因为很多人他是为了这个和家人在一起，比如说他姓张，当他来美国呢，他拿了这个姓王的纸，所以他在美国的这个 legal paper 全部都是王。那如果他以后在美国生活几十年，对吧？他做生意啊什么，如果在法律上有些问题的话呢，这些东西往往就容易造成冲突。如果你有家里边有哪些有文字的这些信件，可以使你碰到警察来查会有麻烦的话，那你就会把它丢掉了。
Once you're a paper son, you're very secretive. You don't want anyone to find out that you have false papers. People are traumatized really by it, and many of them do not even tell their families.
My grandfather came in the 1920s. Some guy noticed him and, hey, you want to go to the US? I can sponsor you or, and give you some papers and go over.
My dad used to tell me that the ship came into Brooklyn and he worked as a cabin boy. And the ship's captain, after sailing with him for 2 years, he said, Lee, go ashore and don't come back.
Sometimes it's hurtful for them to talk about, so they just kind of protect us. They don't even tell us. It's not until we ask. She goes, oh, you didn't you don't know that your father, he was crying for days because he was starving. I was like, of course I didn't know. You never know, never told me. You're telling me right now in this coffee shop and I'm sitting next to you.
I just can't imagine, as a 16-year-old kid, coming to a new land, new language. It's a one-way trip.
They always believed in the future so that they could endure anything because it was going to be for the betterment of their children.
Looking back on them, what kind of feelings do you have towards them now?
I think it's just gratitude.
June 21st, 1894.
So 94. at times you're sort of embarrassed because your dad was so old. But then I remember the times he used to sit and he'd just stare at me with a smile, but his eyes like telling you, I wish I could tell you so much, but he just did, you know? You have to remember, I was like 21 when he was like 80s. You're 21, you're just beginning your life. You're starting out with, you know, with relationships with girls and whatever, you know, in your schooling or your career. You didn't think about, you know, about history so much. And he had this big history, but he never shared it with us.
I found on a newspaper archive.
Chinese maid wants to die.
That's
wow,
right.
that's
yeah. A woman named Su Oi. She was going to marry this man named Sam Lin, whose name is pretty close to others we found on the Titanic. Yeah. But it mentions that her intended returned to China to arrange for importation of some merchandise. And while abroad, he engaged Sam Fonglong and Li Ling, two friends, to accompany him to Cleveland, where they were to stand up with him at the marriage and then act as clerks in the store. So these names are also names on the Titanic, including our Fonglong, if he was Sam Fonglong.
Sure.
The story ends, I only want now to die, she said through an interpreter, because she'd lost her intended husband.
The three names that are mentioned here, of the three, only one of them survived. Clearly, the three of them would have known each other prior to getting on Titanic.
These are the compensation claims that had been filed by people who were on the Titanic. So this is Fonglong. Now his claim, monetary total, is $137.09. What is he claiming that the others are not?
Let's look at this list. 2 pairs boots, 6 shirts, half dozen collars and neckties.
The 6 were contracted to work on the Annetta, which was chartered by the Atlantic Fruit Company.
It doesn't really seem like a suit and tie kind of working environment.
Right. The fact that he had collars and neckties on his list in the Titanic, what did he think he was going to do? The newspaper article of the young woman who said she was meeting her fiancé, who was on the Titanic, who was his friend, and who he was supposed to start a business with in Ohio. Those neckties were for that life. And what happened? His friends died, and he found himself having to maybe start from square one.
In the days after Titanic sank, boats were sent out from Canada to look for bodies at the accident site. Around 250 were collected, and they were brought back to Halifax for burial. Most of the bodies are described in a logbook, and many, though not all, have been positively identified over the years. One of the descriptions of the body in grave 233 says, very dark, in parentheses, like Japanese. Now, we know that there was one Japanese passenger on board, and he was rescued. The only other Asians on board were the 8 Chinese passengers. So if there is an Asian buried in this grave, then he has to be one of our 2 Chinese passengers that did not survive. It would either be Li Ling or Len Lam. It would be one of the 2.
We spent a lot of time trying to piece together stories from facts across multiple documents. Then we came across a more complete reference to a man called Li Bing in a memoir written by a Canadian journalist. This Li Bing ran a cafe in a town called Cambridge in Ontario, and he would sometimes speak to his customers about his survival of Titanic. And one of our 6 survivors being so public with his Titanic story is really rare. We hadn't seen it before.
The first waves of Chinese immigration to Canada were mostly based around labor. And so it started around the middle of the 19th century and continued right up until 1923. They filled a huge, huge labor need that Canada had at the moment. The building of a new country is a very labor-intensive process. So the major marquee piece of legislation that controlled Chinese migration to Canada is called the Chinese Immigration Act, where every Chinese person entering Canada had to pay $50. That piece of legislation was amended several times between 1885 and 1923. The sums were prohibitive, so it would go from $50 to $100 to $500. And the idea was to make Chinese migration to Canada more restrictive. But if you could pay the tax, you could come.
So I read the article that the research team put in the local paper. I just thought that I might be able to look up a couple things. My first step was to start on Ancestry, but I found Li Bangs all over Ontario. There's not a whole lot available online. So I came to the archives where I found the business directories for the White Rose Cafe.
This is a fairly big facility for a regional archive. Okay.
This is Dan Schmaltz from the Cambridge Archives.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Dan. Okay.
Nice to meet you.
He's brought us some of the local business directories.
Okay.
This covers the city of Galt, which is what this area was called. At the time, Mr. Bing would have been here. And you see on here, we have 16 Main, the White Rose Cafe.
Okay.
So this is a picture. You can see the top 3 windows here, so have cafe written in them.
Okay.
We do have a couple of photos of Li Bing. They're actually from glass plates.
Oh, wow.
These are from the collection of a Galt photographer by the name of Robert Darrow.
Okay.
This is the only non-white person, actually, in the entire collection of 1,800 negatives.
Wow.
This is a census from Galt from 1921. And if you look near the bottom here, there's a Li family.
Okay.
The last one right here is Mr. Bing. On here, it lists him as 19 years old.
Based on this, he seems to be a little bit young. How old are the other people in his household?
His uncle Sam was 44, so that would be Sam Lee. Kun Lee is 40. Now, Kun Lee, interestingly, would have been born about 1881. So that would be right around our age for Li Bing.
I mean, what do we think? On the one hand, we've read about Li Bing. We have accounts of him, telling people, restaurant patrons, yes, I was on Titanic, giving them information. So
I think it was definitely this family.
Okay.
Where it fits in with all the name changes, which one specifically is Li Bing, is a little fuzzy.
Kun Lee was an interesting character. He was the age that we thought the Li Bing on Titanic should have been. His nephew, the younger Li Bing, was the right name, but the wrong age. Is it possible that Kun Lee was the real Li Bing, and Bing was a name that they shared, or perhaps passed down the generations? That's something we may never know.
In the Cafe 13, next to the White Rose Cafe, we pulled together a couple of people whose family remembered the restaurant and remembered Li Bing, just so Stephen could meet them. and he could kind of get a feel for how the community felt about him.
One of the nice things about Li Bing is that he seems to have told the story to strangers, whereas, for example, one of our other survivors never even told his sons.
My dad had a real, the knowledge that he had about the Titanic, and I always wondered how he knew so much.
Right.
So he must have listened pretty well to what Li Bing had to say. But my aunt said he used to talk all the time to his mother about it.
We spoke to a woman named Marge Bartholomew that used to play in this area. And she said that Li Bing would come out and give all the children playing in the area glasses of milk from the restaurant.
Yeah. So you would have had to come down the stairs and
I find that amazing that he would have been looking out the window and come down all the way and given them glasses of milk.
My mother talked more than my dad did, but they both talked about this Chinese man. And no, I don't ever remember them calling him by name, but I do remember my mother saying that he had a restaurant and that when he left Galt, he went to work at Lishi Gardens in Toronto, which my mother said was a very famous Chinese restaurant back at that time.
You get a sense of the progress of this man's life. Moving to Canada, running a restaurant in a small town, and then later moving to the big city. What was his plan? Where was he going? We found the old site of Lychee Gardens restaurant in Toronto, but it was long gone. Just before we left Canada, Julie found a gravestone for Kun Li just outside Cambridge. It gave us a year of death, 1943, which was the year that White Rose Cafe had closed. It's possible that the younger Li Bing went to Toronto in the aftermath of that death. The headstone also gave us a place of birth for Kun Li, a town called Hengtang, back in Taishan, not far from where Feng Wing's son was born.
哦，台山呢是这样一个地方，它是靠近中国的南海嘛。中国人有一句话：靠山吃山，靠水吃水。它靠这个大海，从来就是靠海来谋生。到了近代1840年以后吧，随着人口的增长，人多地少，所以当时呢也发生了一些土客械斗，长达14年的土客械斗。所以台山人呢，在这样一个情况下，就是拼命的到海外去谋生，这是一个它的特点，所以它是中国最著名的侨乡之一嘛。
You know, thinking that we have at least one survivor who's from that area, so maybe we could find more.
你哋爸爸或者祖父同你哋講過關於沉船嘅事？唔識啦嚇。
冇記啊，即係話遊船要呢出海啊，到上岸啊嗰啊。
家下共產啊嘛，咪家下啲女嘅，即係爸即係咪啲仔共產咯。
望嗰個阿嬸有冇？
哦係係。
阿嬸啊，阿嬸呀，都未講。黃會公啊，即係朋友現代㗎咯，你下戰嘅作現代咯嘛。
要冇讀初運啊？
要捉虎，用信咯，捉虎就信，捉虎唔冇。
要錢啊！
黃會公啊，見即係啲風信咧，就防明山對黃會公燒啊，好多。
Be tamed. Give me an argument.
即係防明山啲對嗰個大牆啊。
Wow. It's November 27th, 1980. We got to see the stack of letters that Feng Wing San had written to a relative. He has a very distinctive handwriting, both in English and in Chinese. And again, we're kind of reinforcing what we knew about his character. He's still sending money back, even later in his life.
咁啲信你收翻起佢啦。
好，非常感謝。
多謝，謝謝。係啊，我條天命我係姓鐘嘅。哦。你講下咩船啊？你泰坦尼克號嗰個船。即係唔係以前話美國嗰隻話咩搭？泰坦尼克號係咯。哦，我睇過嗰次電影啊。哦，睇一個電影係。哦，係啊，其中有一個人我哋懷疑咧係響呢度出去。哦。其實想問下咧，嗰個協特大號以前他們有回國貢獻，即係同回家有冇屋相中個工人有冇講過嗰個件事啊？咩㗎？係講過啊。係講過啊。哦。你聽邊個講㗎？即係啲前輩嘅人啊嘛。係啦。我覺得係咁嘅。先嚟講嘛，即係講成，你想知點解係啊？即係小條海公園要佢哋出事。嗰個姓鐘嘅係叫鐘乜嘢名啊？你哋知唔知啊？啊，只知道係喺呢度出去嘅姓鐘嘅。而家村裏邊咧，除咗你之外咧，仲有邊個人知道啊？即係這啲是最常是報道租㗎啦，呢㗎啦。揾唔揾到即係近時出去嘅地方咧？大約喺邊度出去咧？呢度可唔可以睇到啊？而家都上山不住啦，都實住個地方啦。Standing in here and with most of the evidence that said they live from this harbor, I think it's very important that we have something to dedicate it to them. So through them, people know about what Thai San people have done, the last 100-something years.
The biggest discovery of that trip was we were sitting with like a great nephew of Feng Wing San, who looks so much like him. I was taken aback when I saw him. It was just so surprising. We were just going through various details with the Feng family and saying, how do you know this? How do you know this? And he just kind of looks up and says, oh yeah, he wrote it to me in a poem. 就邊高會闊，啲浪波波，一條棍在啲高人我，即窮嗰個啲高人嘅，現代呢啲有幾個，繳本眼淚啲小可，咁講。 With almost no prompting from us except a few general questions, out comes this poem that perfectly illustrates the Fanglong story. Just unbelievable. I mean, once we picked ourselves up off the floor, then we wrote it down and, looked at it and but I mean, what if he had never told us?
The high sky, the vast sea, the billowing waves. A wooden stick saved my life. 3 or 4 of my brothers are here. Dry their tears and laugh. It meets all the requirements of classical Chinese poem in terms of being a 7-character or syllabic lines, and each character at the end rhymes. It still is a very well-written poem. And of course, unlike the Angel Island poems, they're not about detention, they're not about being mistreated and hoping that, they'll be able to avenge their mistreatment. none of the contents, but form-wise, it's definitely reflective of the poems that other Chinese were writing at Angel Island at the time. Angel Island, it was built in 1910 to better enforce the Chinese exclusion laws. It was a detention center for processing and detaining all immigrants coming through San Francisco into the United States. 2/3 of the 500,000 immigrants who were processed to Angel Island during this 30-year period were Chinese or Japanese. They were separated from other groups. Men and women are kept in separate areas, and Chinese were separated from the Japanese and everybody else. The detention barracks where the Chinese men were kept, every inch of wall space, you will see Chinese calligraphy. We've been able to uncover 200 poems. Many of the poems talk about feeling lonely, longing for family, and then many of the poems also talk about the mistreatment and the way they were being imprisoned. So a lot of venting of complaints and frustrations about being detained in such a way. China will avenge this for us, cut off all the barbarians' heads in revenge. So angry, very overwhelmingly powerful, angry poems. It's like the walls are crying out to you. Don't forget what happened to us here and why, and do something about it, or learn from this. This is our record. This is our protests.
中国有一句古话，叫做“苛政猛于虎”。移民局说一声不行就不行了，政府说一声不行就不行了。当他们面对极其巨大的这个负面的力量的时候，他们还是不停的抗争。我们可以想象，他们在那种年代有很多的这些挫折感，有失败感，但是一代一代的华人没有放弃，生存下来是非常不容易的。美国变得更加 inclusive， 更加包容。而这个包容，它是通过华人的抗争来取得的。
And the Chinese Exclusion Act, and so we will prevail no matter how difficult the next years will be. They have worked. They are part of the American fabric, and each and every one of us is a part of this. Our communities are worth it. Our children are worth it. Our families are. We love, and we win. We are not going to give up.
I was very encouraged to find Fong Wing Sun's petition for naturalization. That's a document you have to fill out when you want to become a citizen. And his lawful admission was in New York as Fong Wing Sun, September 15th, 1920, on an unknown ship. We have Cynthia Lee in New York going through ship records as well. Sure. And so ideally she'll find something pretty close to this.
The task at hand was to see if we could place Fong Lang and Fong Wing Sun in the same place, generally the same time frame. One of my colleagues came up with a ship card. The only information on the ship card was the name of the ship, the Rondo, and sure enough, our guy is there. Fong Lang, August 18th, 1920. Fong Wing Sun says that he was in New York, September 15th, 1920. Close enough. So what's in a name? What kind of power do you yield when you change your name? It's been really fascinating to follow this one person who seems really okay with reinventing himself. It really makes you kind of appreciate, what you had to have inside in order to have a life like this. He's a survivor.
Two? That's two? So it's this one right here.
Which one?
Keep going. Oh. And he's got the Commander Low plaque on the outside.
Can anyone hear me? Down here. I see him. Bring him in quickly.
Hello there, Mr. Lowe.
Yes.
My name's Tom. This has been a pleasure and honor to meet you.
Nice to see you, yeah?
Yeah.
You're a big boy.
Yeah, I am. How are you?
Come in.
Thank you. Do people in this neighborhood know?
Oh, yeah. Well, when I was a boy, I was always been known as Titanic Lowe's grandson. And
Did they ever ask, like, the more personal questions?
oh, no, they don't bother. It's well known that I don't know anything. My grandfather used to sail a lot, and he's always used to capsize as well.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Your grandfather capsized?
Oh, yeah, he capsized. And he fell off a boat in the river here, crossed between the dinghy and the boat, and he...
Really?
Yeah. So the caption in the paper the next day, Titanic survivor survived again, or he wasn't very pleased with that.
No. So my father was on that boat at the time then?
He'd be on that one there. That's him coming towards the Carpathia with the sail up. These continuous certification of discharge, the ships that he was on. So this one, Titanic, signed on the 10th of April, Southampton, 5th mate, date and place of discharge, 15th of April, 1912, at sea.
Now, is this the famous photo of your grandfather that's always on the computer?
There's several, but that's one of them. You can have that.
I can have this one?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, so is that right?
Thank you.
I've written on the back who it's from.
Thank you.
To you, from me.
Wow. Well, thank you, John. I really appreciate taking time to let me meet you and so forth.
No, it's a
share your story.
great pleasure. The circle's complete now.
Yeah. Really,
We found each other.
I so much appreciate it. It was a very emotional meeting. Can't even describe it. It's sort of knowing that without his grandfather's humanity, my existence wouldn't have been here or my family. When I walked out of the house that day, and I remember seeing that sign, here's the officer, 5th officer in the Titanic, well, then you're just sort of like tagged. This is what you're known for. And I'm not sure if I really want that notoriety, so much. I just want to know the story, the truth to be out there.
In an age where immigration continues and we continue to examine these questions, I think it is critical that we look back at stories such as that of the Six, at what they struggled for, why they did it, why they thought it was worth it. To make a life for themselves there in a place where they were not welcome and not entitled to citizenship, and that they stuck it out, not knowing that they would ever achieve that. surviving Titanic was not by any means the greatest obstacle they overcame in their life. You know, Titanic was really just a bump in the road for them, as significant as it may seem. They never gave up. They never gave up on the night of April 14th, and they never gave up in the rest of their lives. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from that.
Set out from the shoreline, strength to endure wind and rain, memories bitter and sweet that will fade with the pain. It made you a creature of shadows, a stranger you journeyed alone through forest and mountains, but you were a stone on the shore. The dark brought the terror, opened the door. Death that you witnessed still haunts you. You scarcely believed you would die. Whilst you held your secrets, the fate changed as clouds in the sky. The dark brought the terror, opened the door. Ooh, slave to phantoms. The past lies as cold as a stone. But you were released to walk softly and silent alone. The hope that you carried's undying. Your strength took you far from your home. Memories scatter in photographs fading unknown.